So this is our 4012 tab C, and there are two types of dependents. So the test for all dependents is the taxpayer must not qualify to be claimed as a dependent by another taxpayer. So if you yourself are a dependent, then you cannot claim a dependent on your tax return. A joint return. The return is filed only to claim refund of withheld income taxes or estimated taxes paid on there. So you cannot file a dependent if they're required to file a tax return. If they don't meet any other criteria on there, then that means they're not eligible to be claimed to be a dependent. Also, they have to be a citizen or resident. So that means they're either a U.S. citizen, a U.S. resident, or a national. So those are people with the permanent residency. Or they are a resident of Canada or a resident of Mexico on there. So these are the tests for all dependents. There are two types of dependents. There's the qualifying child, and we have the qualifying relative. So we're going to go and talk about the qualifying child first. And for the qualifying child, there are 5 tests that have to be met to determine can we select qualifying child for that individual. There's the relationship, the age, the residency, the support test, and the joint return test. So on here, we're going to go to this chart, and this is on page C-1. The first one is the relationship. So the child must be your son, daughter, stepchild, foster child, a sibling, half sibling, step sibling, or a descendant. So it could be like a grandchild listed on there. Adopted child is always treated as your own child. The term adopted child includes a child who was lawfully placed with you for legal adoption on here. So this is the relationship. Then we drop down to the age. The child must be under the age of 18 at the end of the year and younger than you or your spouse if filing jointly. So that means 18 or younger. Or under the age of 24 at the end of the year, a full-time student and younger than you or your spouse if jointly. So if they're going off to college, at least a full-time student for a semester. So those 5 months on there. So that's for they're in college, 23 and younger. Or any age if they are permanently and totally disabled. Permanently and totally disabled, we do not ask for the qualifying information. That means a doctor has determined that that individual is unable to provide substantial or gainful work for at least a year. And we just let them know that if they were to get audited, that they would have to provide that documentation to the IRS on there. So we don't ask for all that additional information. So you'll see for number 2, there are 3 criteria under age. So it's under the age of 18, under the age of 23 if they're a full-time student. 18 and younger. If they're a full-time student, 23 or younger, or if they're permanently and totally disabled, there is no age requirement. And so what they'll say is they have younger than you or your spouse if filing jointly. So that they do have some times where a sibling could be claiming their sibling on there. And so that's where they're going to look at the age. So it has to be the only way that I could claim an older sibling is if that older sibling was permanently and totally disabled, or if I'm married, my spouse would have to be older than that sibling to qualify. Then we go to the residency. The child must have lived with you for more than half the year. So that's more than 6 months, so 7 months or more that that dependent would have had to have been with you in your household. Again, there are those temporary absences if the child was sick and was in the hospital. Maybe if the child is away for college or boarding school. Those are considered temporary absences, and that child is still meeting those qualifications of live with you more than half the year. Then we talk about the support test. The child must not have provided more than half of his or her own support for the year. And so when we talk about the support, that means for as their like rent, their living quarters, their food. So even if this child works, what is their money going towards? Is it to support them? Is it to pay for the roof over their head, for them to eat? Or do you allow them as a parent, just allowing them to put it into their savings account, put it in their bank account and save? Or is it that they can just go and have fun, play video games, whatever, recreational? On here, so paying attention closely to number 4, the child must have not provided more than half of his or her own support for the year, because it's going to flip when we look at the qualifying relative. And then we have the child isn't filing a joint return for the year unless that joint return is filed only to claim a refund of income, tax withheld, or estimated tax paid on here. So this means that this qualifying child, they're still by dependent. They're only filing their tax return again because they're going to get those federal taxes withheld. They're not required to file a tax return, or they're not considered my dependent. So a qualifying child could meet all of those circumstances on there. Even if they had a significant amount of income, it is going based on what did they do for the support of that. Did they use that income for their own support? Number 6 is just those rules for the qualifying child. If a child is the qualifying child of more than one person, the IRS just has tiebreaker rules that can be deferred to your site coordinator on there, because that's like children of divorced or separated parents, or maybe there's multiple relatives that are taking care of the child, to see what's the best option and route to go on that one. Any questions about qualifying child or any scenarios that you guys have questions about? Okay. We're going to go into the next one, a qualifying relative. So who is considered a qualifying relative? They cannot be a qualifying child, because that means we would then select them to put them down for a qualifying child. They have to be a member of household or relationship. So member of household or relationship determines based upon that person would have had to live in your home all year for them to, if they're not related to you, or based upon the relationship or relative. We're also going to look at the gross income and then the support test. So looking at these 4 qualifying rules. So going back to the chart on the C1, on that second column for the qualifying relative, the person cannot be your qualifying child or the qualifying child of any other taxpayer. A child isn't the qualifying child of any other taxpayer if the child's parent or any other person from whom the child is defined as a qualifying person isn't required to file an income tax return, or files an income tax return only to get a refund of income tax, federal income tax withheld. So say based upon my age, I made, I'm going to say $12,000. So I'm not required to file a tax return. And I have a dependent. And so I have the option to choose, am I going to put the dependent on that on my tax return or not? On there, because I'm not required to file a tax return. Now we go back to chart D, I should file my child because I will qualify for some credits, some refundable credits. So that means me not filing it, there may be someone else that my child can meet the qualifying child requirements and they can put them on the tax return. Maybe if I was staying with a family member, maybe parents on there, and they were still helping me support, maybe they would be able to use my child as a qualifying child on there. Then we have number 2. The person either must be related to you in one of the ways listed under relatives who do not have to live with you. We're going to go and look at that table, but that is like your aunts, uncles, your parents, niece, nephew to be considered a qualifying relative, or must live with you all year as a member of your household. On there, and so the part B, must live with you all year as a member of your household. Those I like to give, like those are those boyfriend, girlfriend type relationships on there. Or we just saw the example, I think it was with Joan and Mary Ann. They were both widowed. On there, she had to file single, but she would be able to claim her friend as a qualifying relative because she did not work all year and they were not related, but she lived with her all year. She did not work, so she would meet those qualifications on there. Then we have number 3. The person's gross income for the year must be less than $4,400. So a lot of time, this is where it throws those individuals out to be considered a qualifying relative because they have gross income more than the $4,400. And it says gross income means all income the person received in the form of money, goods, property, and services that isn't exempt from tax. So if their only source of income is Social Security benefits and they don't qualify, they're not considered a married filing separate status, they're not married, then Social Security would not be qualifying as part of gross income for that $4,400 threshold. So say, for example, I was taking care of my mother and her only source of income was Social Security, and she got annually Social Security, I would say $20,000 for the year. She's not married on there, but she's my qualifying relative on there because she is my parent. She is related to me. And remember, my mother does not have to be in my household. So she could, I could be maintaining her home, or she could be in a senior facility, or she could be in a nursing home. So because it's just her Social Security benefits and she's not married, she does meet that Social Security income of $20,000. It does qualify for number 3 on there. That Social Security, it would not be included in her gross income. But again, you're probably saying I'm confusing you on there but in most situations, Social Security is not included in gross income. But when it comes time for you to do the tax return, we've already made those the determining factors for you on there. We've already given you all the information, the source documents that you need to enter in. We would just come and tell you, we didn't put the Social Security because that's not required on there. So as you're starting to do those tax returns, you would kind of be able to understand how to put all these pieces together and why we're not entering in some information or why some information doesn't qualify and doesn't have to be entered in. And then for the qualifying relative number 4, you must provide more than half of the person's total support for the year. So you can see this is totally different than the qualifying child. The qualifying child cannot provide more than half of their support. This one is you, the taxpayer, must provide more than half of that person's total support for the year. So if my mom had her home, she was still staying in her home, and I was assisting her in maintaining the home, I need to provide more than half the cost of helping her maintain that home in order to put her down as a qualifying relative. If it's an aunt or uncle, niece or nephew, on there, I would need to provide more than half of the support for them on there. So if they're working, we have to look at their income and my income on there and see, am I providing more than half the support? So we talk about those relatives for the qualifying relative. Which of those relatives do not have to live with you? You can see that it can be your son, daughter, stepchild, foster child, or descendant, a sibling, half sibling, a parent, or aunt or uncle, grandparent, or it could be step. And the reason why we go back over these are because, again, this could be an older sibling. But again, because qualifying child, we still have to look at those age requirements on there. So if somebody is 25 and they're not working, they did not work for that for 2022, they're not considered a qualifying child because of their age. So they would qualify as a qualifying relative on there based upon the criteria on there. They either been in my household for the entire year, a relative, gross income, the support, they would meet the criteria to be a qualifying relative. Any questions? Yes. Oh, yes.
So, say you have a relative that didn't work, but they applied for unemployment. How does that work into them? Like, would they still qualify as a dependent?
So unemployment is still considered your gross part of their gross income on there. So again, if it is over the 4,400, then they would disqualify you to claim them as a qualifying relative on there. Yes.
Just making sure, like, do the tax payers, when they come to like the site, do they have to bring like utility bills or marriage certificates to prove their statuses? Like utility bills to prove that they're head of household, then they cover the costs?
Okay, so question was, does somebody have to bring in utility bills or marriage certificates to prove like their head of household status or that they provided more than half the costs? No, they do not on there. So we don't ask them for all of that information on that 13614C. They're filling it out. And so on there, it does ask them that they provide more than half the cost. Now, if they need some more understanding or clarification of what is more than half the cost, then we can throw out like utility bills. If they're renting, your rent, if you're a homeowner, your mortgage interest, that you pay more than half of those costs to take care of that qualifying person on there. Now, because we're just helping them prepare the tax return. We're not employees of the IRS. So now what you're saying for those utility bills or marriage certificate, that may be something if they were to come back and they would get audited or have to go through an exam, they may have to provide that to the IRS on there. So yes, we don't ask them for all the documentation as if we're sending them through the exam, but we can make sure that they have the information they need should they have to go through one on there. But they're certifying based on completing that intake sheet that yes, if they did or didn't. Okay, any other questions? Okay, and so you'll also see in the 4012, if you want to use it, it has on here worksheet for determining support. So there may be multiple people like siblings that are taking care of their parents. And everybody is trying to find out like who's going to claim who or who can claim who. They can use this worksheet to determine for determining support. So did we actually provide more than half the cost of taking care of our parents? If we did actually provide more than half the cost, you know, who's eligible, who's actually going to claim our parents for that tax year? And for determining support on here, so you'll see where it says the following items aren't included in total support. Federal, state, and local income taxes paid by persons from their own income, Social Security, Medicare taxes paid by persons from their own income, life insurance premiums, funeral expenses, scholarships received by your child if your child is a student, survivor dependents educational assistance payments used for the support of the child who receives them. TANF and other governmental payments under proposed Treasury regulations. If you receive the TANF, payments or other similar payments use the support to support another person, those payments are considered support you provided for that person rather than support by the government or third party. So that could be for the head of household. If they have a child on there and they're trying to see, did they provide more than half the support? If they receive any TANF or government benefits, then we do know that, okay, that is considered the support that the taxpayer provided And the reason why sometimes they have this because maybe you have someone that comes in and it's the taxpayer and they have 3 dependents. And you're looking at their W-2 and they're saying that, okay, all they made for that year was $12,000. So it would lead you to maybe ask additional questions on there. How are they living? You know, probably in the city of Dallas, and all they received is $12,000. Now it starts to have me to think, is there someone else living in the household? How do they provide support for themselves as well as their 3 dependents? And so this is just for me to make sure that I have an understanding or clarity. You know, I don't want to, and I have to make sure I say it in the right way and ask them. Just because we're preparing the tax return and we want to make sure that we're not missing someone on the tax return that should be. Or maybe they are married filing jointly and they're wanting to file head of household. That, you know, so I want to make sure that I'm privy to all the information. So I would ask them, do they receive any other, you know, government assistance? Is someone else, do they receive government assistance? Is someone living in the household on there? It could also be child support. Child support is not taxable on there, but at least I'm made aware of that as I'm filing the tax return. So now I have an understanding, you know, if they were to go through an audit or exam, okay, this is why their income is what it is, because they have other means of income that are coming in that are not taxable, that do not have to be reflected on the tax return. So this is what helps them provide the support for themselves as well as their dependents. Okay, so we have some more poll questions on here, and I think this is probably where we will try to taper it off. Okay, so Todd has lived with his girlfriend Eva and her 2 children all year in his home. Eva's gross income is $25,000, and she is required to file a return. In this situation, are the children's Todd's qualifying relatives? Yes or no? You guys are correct. No, they're not his qualifying relatives because Eva has a filing requirement and her children meet the test to be Eva's qualifying children. So Todd is not able to claim them on his tax return. And so sometimes we see these situations where maybe if Todd and Eva came in, Todd wants to assume or say that one of those children is like his stepchildren or his children. So then they'll want to split up Eva's children. Eva claims a child and then Todd claims a child on there. Then Todd's going to come back and get audited on there because he's going to have to show proof that, you know, that is your stepchild. Well, then the IRS may ask for a marriage certificate. Or for the children, we need to see that you're the father listed on the birth certificate. We're going to have to see some documentation now that you're able to claim them, because Eva claimed one child. Why did she not claim the other one? Bob, 22, is a full-time student and lives with his parents when he is not in the dorm. He worked part-time but did not pay over half of his total support. Is Bob considered a qualifying child or a qualifying relative? Yes, you all are correct. He is a qualifying child. So Bob meets the relationship, age, residency, and support test. Okay. Doris, a U.S. citizen, is 8 years old and had a small role in a television series. She made $60,000 during the tax year, but her parents put all the money in a trust fund to pay for college. She lived with her parents all year. Does Doris meet the test to be a qualifying child? Okay, I'm hearing some yeses, some quiet yeses, and you guys are correct. She is a qualifying child because she did not use any of the $60,000 for her support. And she meets the relationship, age, residency test. So she is a qualifying child. Sally has been supporting her friend Ann and Ann's young son, Bobby. Ann and Bobby lived with Sally the entire year. Ann worked part-time and made $3,100 in wages. Ann files a return only to have her withholdings refunded. Does Ann and her son qualify as dependents for Sally? Okay, you all hear some yeses, and you all are correct. Now, I think there's a follow-up to this question. Which type of dependent status will Ann and her son qualify for on Sally's tax return? Are they qualifying, is a qualifying child or qualifying relative? What will Ann and her son qualify for? What type of dependent for Sally? Qualifying relative, because they would be for the member of the household. There is no blood relation. So qualifying relative. Okay, and what is Sally's filing status for that tax year? Okay, I'm hearing head of household. Okay, do y'all remember what was the qualifications for head of household? Is Sally married or unmarried? Married or considered unmarried? Or unmarried, considered unmarried? And then, who has to qualify you for the head of household? Because there's no blood relation. Ann and her son, they're not related to Sally. You guys are correct. That filing status would be single. Now, Sally would come in and probably think and tell us that she is head of household because she has someone in her home that she's supporting, but she would only be able to qualify them for dependents on there. We also have single people that have no one in their household that tell us they're head of household on there. But we know for federal tax purposes, you have to have a qualifying person in order to have another filing status other than single.